The deadly game. Outside, the storm raged on, battering the windows with a relentless symphony of chaos. In this decrepit mansion, the candles cast their long, dancing shadows upon the cracked walls. The air inside was replete with the stench of damp wood and mildew, and an occasional groan of the old house settled into the darkness around them. 7 people had arrived in this grand parlor of the mansion, all of them casting nervous glances at each other. None of them understood why they had received this invitation and what was awaiting them. The only common thing between them was the strange black envelope arriving at their doorstep a week earlier. The envelopes contained a simple message. You are invited to play the game. The winner will have their greatest wish granted. The losers, well, you'll see. It was an invitation too good to refuse. Others desperate, others greedy. But as they all sat there in silence, they all could feel the same cold weight of dread settling in their stomachs. The vast majority of the room was dominated by this incredibly large wooden table, gleaming with a wonderful polish in a sea of dust that seemed to cling to everything else in the room. Centered in it, in an antique board game, lay the pieces already set, up as if awaiting them. Almost black with odd symbols etched into the wood, the dice board did not go unnoticed as I reached for one of the game pieces. Eerily lifelike, miniature figures, each so human they seemed to mirror each of the 70 participants. "I don't like this," muttered Marcus, a wiry man in his early 30s. His fingers drummed nervously on the arm of his chair. A gambler by trade, a man who lived for high-stakes games. There was something about this that felt wrong, in addition to the obvious queasiness of the storm. "None of us do," said Sarah, the tall, confident woman with piercing green eyes. A lawyer, she was used to reading people and analyzing situations, but this game, this place, is different. But we're here now, and I doubt leaving is an option. Just then, at the other end of the room, the huge wooden doors slammed shut behind all of them, thudding the floor where all their jump was amplified. Candles crackled wildly, the light dancing across the walls in gross, distorted shapes. The letter said the game started at midnight. Spoke up Ethan, a soft man with dark circles under his eyes. His voice was level, but hands trembled to glance at the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Hands of the clock had just struck 12. Then suddenly, the fire roared to life, flames crackling and casting a warm, unsettling glow across the room. And there was a low, disembodied voice that flowed through the space, deep and malevolent. "Welcome, players," the voice said, sending a chill down every player's spine. "The game has begun. The rules are simple. Each of you will have your turn. The dice shall decide your fate. If you survive your challenge, you will continue. If you fail, your life is for forfeit." A collective shiver ran down the group. "What is this?" Trent demanded, a hulking beef figure with a no-nonsense attitude. He was an ex-soldier who had always relied on his wits and brawn to fight his way out of tricky situations. But here, in this place, he was at the absolute mercy of whatever may come his way. "Sounds like a sick joke," said Mia, a small woman with short, bright golden hair. An artist with a fascination for promise and something beyond the ordinary, she regretted every step which had brought her to this forsaken mansion. The board started to throb with dim light, and the dice on the table center started to hang in mid-air without anyone causing them to, just dangling there for a moment before hitting the floor in front of Ethan. "Seems you're first," said Liam, a young bespectacled man who looked as if he hadn't slept in weeks, one of a computer programmer, summoned by a cryptic message through an encrypted channel. And now that he's face to face with what all of this really is, he began to wonder if it's all just a trap. Ethan swallowed hard while pushing his shaking fingers to reach for the dice. A million questions revolved around in his head, but that final warning left over by the voice resonated in his head. If you survive your challenge, you may continue. If you fail. He rolled the dice. They clattered across the table, spinning wildly before coming to pro. Rest on a 6. The board reacted instantly. The figure that looked like Ethan moved 6 spaces under its own power, coming to rest on a square inscribed with a red ominous symbol, a skull. And so, still speaking, with a note in the voice very much more gleeful, said, "Ethan, your challenge is fear. In the room upstairs, a door waits. Beyond it lies your greatest terror. Face it, or perish." The words just sat on them in stunned silence. Ethan's eyes darted wildly about the room in search of an escape, but there was none. The parlor door stood sealed, and the only way out was up the grand staircase leading deeper into the mansion. With little choice, Ethan rose to his feet. His legs felt like leaden weights, yet he managed somehow to propel himself forward toward the stairs. The others sat in strained silence as he disappeared into the darkness of the upstairs floor. The minutes dragged by. Each passed slower than the last. The crackle of the fire remained the only noise until, sharp above the chateau, pounded rain on the windows, and then, somewhere above the chateau, a scream. Ethan's scream, tainted with an unthinkable terror. The scream ended. The silence that followed was a strangulation. "He's dead," Mia whispered, her face white. "We don't know that," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. The fear was palpable now, thick in the air. "He might still be alive." "No," Marcus muttered, shaking his head. "You heard that scream. He's dead." The game board glowed once more, and Ethan's piece toppled over, lying flat on the board. "Next," the voice commanded, its tone almost hungry. The dice floated again. This time they landed in front of Sarah. She hesitated, her eyes on the dice as if they were some poisonous thing. But she had no other option. She took a breath, rolled them. The dice spun and came to rest on a 2. Her piece advanced, landing on a space marked with a dagger. "Sarah," the voice said, "your loyalty will be tested. Downstairs there is a door. Behind it waits a person for you, someone from your past, who once sold you out. It is up to you what to do with that person. Forgive them or kill them." The blood seemed to run cold in Sarah's veins. She hadn't anticipated that. It reminded her of the person the voice must have been referring to, the one former business associate who'd led her to lose everything all those years ago as well. The burn of the betrayal felt so fresh in her mind. One last glance around the others, and then up. Sarah was on her feet and walking. towards the door in the hallway to the basement. The others watched as she exited the room. The tension-filled space rippled through. The creaking of the door followed her into the shadows. Many more minutes had to go by before once again the silence was broken by a scream. But this was not one of fear. It was an expression of agony. Sarah's scream, filled with rage and sorrow. Moments afterward she returned, her face streaked with tears. Her hands were shaking, red with blood. The board glowed, and her piece was still standing. She had won her challenge. As the game unfolds, one by one, players face their horrific challenges, and at the end of it all, much more terrifying and personal ones wait for them. Marcus, the gambler, was made to play his life on Russian roulette, only he survived with a bullet in the chamber. Mia was met head-on with the monstrous reality of altered art, and managed to barely make it out with her sanity intact. The message that was to be decoded, when he failed to do so, would unleash a deadly trap. He succeeds, though not without shattering his nerves. The last challenge presented itself before Trent, the ex-soldier. His roll of the dice led him to the same skull symbol that had gobbled up Ethan. The voice chuckled darkly. "Trent, your challenge is a game of sacrifice. To win the game, you must sacrifice the life of one of the remaining players. Choose wisely." The room held its collective breath in tense silence as they turned to look at Trent. He ground his jaw in tension and set his eyes hard. And there it was. The rules stated it in black and white print. They had to die so he could live. The weight of that decision seemed to crush in on his shoulders like a vice. "You can't do this," Sarah whispered low and urgent. "We've gone too far. We have a way out." "End," Trent said nothing more. His eyes darted around to each of the others. All his military training hadn't prepared him for this. The decisions he was having to make meant just that. He was actively going to decide who lived and who died. His heart was pounding inside his chest, and his brow was slicking with sweat. They waited immobile with the others while Trent chose. It would all be over soon, after all. He moved to Marcus, the gambler, who had lived more times than it was humanly bearable by luck survived. "Sorry, Marcus," he said, but there was no remorse in the depth of his gaze. Almost before anyone had time to move, Trent snatched the candlestick from the table and swung it with brutal force. It connected with Marcus's head, and he crumpled to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. The others screamed, but it was all over in an instant. The board glowed once more, moving Trent's piece to the final square. Again, the voice spoke, cold and final. "Congratulations, Trent. You have won the game." The doors of the mansion creaked open, letting water stream in, spilling out onto the teal night. And Trent stood there, the weight of his victory seemed to take the shape of many stones on his shoulders. He looked back at them, only to find that their faces were painted with horror and betrayal. And without saying a word, he turned and walked into the storm, disappearing into the dark. Shut went the door behind him. The house again returned to its silence. It was over, but the horror lived on. and would forever define the lives of those who emerged living from the deadly game.